Hello, everybody, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person or even in real time, but I guess we're getting used to this new way of doing things. I'm actually in Stockholm, as you can see, and I'm walking through the old city square on the way to the university. And what I'll do is when I get there, I'll record the rest of the presentation and discuss some of the recent work in patterns and wiki, some new approaches, some interesting, I think, exciting new directions, and specifically some ideas about patterns for COVID-19 and how we might use this pandemic as a kind of teachable moment, if you will, to draw some broader lessons for settlements and for human well-being. So, welcome to our office, the Center for the Future of Places here at KTH University. It's a little lonely here right now, but that's probably a good thing. It'll be nice and quiet for me to give you my presentation. We've been working for a number of years now with UN Habitat on several initiatives, one of which is the New Urban Agenda. And that's a pretty big deal because it's been adopted now by all 193 countries of the United Nations. And it codifies a lot of the central principles in the pattern language and what a lot of us have been working on for many years, walkability and mixed use and so forth. But of course, the fundamental challenge for this kind of document is implementation. And it does include language in the implementation section talking about peer-to-peer learning and open, user-friendly, participatory data platforms and so on. And of course, one of the most successful and widely used examples of that is the wiki. And as many of you know, wiki was rooted in pattern language methodology. In fact, our friend Ward Cunningham really developed wiki as a way of sharing pattern languages of programming. And as many of you probably also know, there are many examples of the incredible influence of pattern languages in software and in many other fields, in gaming and in wiki, as I said. And in fact, you can find pattern languages in molecular biology and anthropology and many, many other fields as well. And of course, that leaves a conundrum. Why has the pattern language methodology not been more influential in architecture? And I've shared some thoughts about that before, the fact that this sort of Bible-like volume has served to trap pattern languages. And I've resolved to do something about that. So what can we learn from the people in these other fields who have made such brilliant progress, especially people in the software world? And many of you know our good friend Ward Cunningham, who was one of the pioneers of pattern languages of programming and the inventor of Wiki and a pioneer of Agile and many other fields as well. And Ward has been a huge help in collaborating on pattern languages in architecture and how they can take advantage of some of these insights. And he has developed what he calls a federated wiki. And in the case of the new pattern language, the wiki version of the pattern language can do all kinds of interesting things thanks to Ward's work. For example, you can add new patterns, you can edit the patterns, you can adapt patterns to specific locations by making changes to them. You can share the patterns with others. You can do new things with the patterns that can be done with data that can't be done, obviously, with paper or with other forms of technology. You can do things like make numeric calculations. You can use handheld devices to make measurements and augmented reality, virtual reality, things like that. Field measurements, they can function as apps. Pretty much anything you can do on an app, you could do within a pattern, a really exciting capability. And the collections are federated, which means they can be shared with many other communities. Entire pattern languages can be shared and edited and transformed and then recombined in very interesting, exciting ways. So, one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that this book has been incredibly successful and incredibly well received, incredibly user friendly. But unfortunately, one fact has been overlooked, and that is that this is a fundamentally open source kind of project. You can see that very clearly in the introduction when they describe the purpose of this book. We hope, of course, that many of the people who read and use this language will try to improve these patterns, will put their energy to work in working on this, and that we imagine that this pattern language might be related to the countless thousands of other languages we hope people will make for themselves in the future. The fact is, we have written this book as a first step in the society-wide process by which people will gradually become conscious of their own pattern languages and work to improve them. So in that spirit, we have taken the format of this pattern language, which is the proto-pattern language, if you will, and taken its successes and used that as a model for creating new patterns and new pattern languages, including the wiki, as I said. So this is one project that has emerged from that process, a new pattern language for growing regions, embodying many of the patterns of the new urban agenda. And we've done this in collaboration, as I said, with UN Habitat and Sustasis Foundation in Portland. And you'll see some other familiar names there: Yodan Rofe, Sergio Porta, Nikos Salingros, and a number of other people from UN Habitat and elsewhere. And you will see a number of the patterns from the new urban agenda here, things about walkability and mixed use and multimodal transportation. Very important emphasis on the quality of public space as rapid urbanization proceeds, and often public space is declining in many parts of the world. But you'll also notice there are different kinds of patterns here. There are actually geometric patterns, for example. There are patterns about emerging challenges of the 21st century, ecological challenges, challenges of informal settlements and slums, sprawl retrofit, and so on. Other kinds of patterns relating to implementation processes, project economics, place governance, affordability patterns, and new technology patterns, and so on. So there's a strong focus on the emerging challenges of the 21st century and some of the patterns that were perhaps not covered in the original book. Of course, there could be many hundreds or thousands more built as well. Now, I mentioned that we stuck pretty close to the original pattern language format, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, of course, that format has been proven successful, at least with the original collection of 253 patterns. Another reason is that if we want to expand the collection and include the 253 patterns, it makes sense to keep within a consistent format. So that's exactly what we've done. You'll notice there is the title of the pattern, the iconic photo, the upward hyperlinks, the problem statement, then the discussion section, continuing discussion section, then the therefore statement, which typically includes a diagram. There may be other diagrams. And then, of course, the downward hyperlinks that link to the other patterns that are in the network below that. And then finally, one of the most important elements is the research citations. Again, this is an evidence-based approach. If people want to argue about the validity of a pattern, that's fine. Let them put their own evidence forward. But in each case, as the original book said, these are like hypotheses that use our best evidence about what the optimal solution might be to a given problem in a given context. So the other critical part of this project is the wiki, and the wiki is really sort of the mirror image of the paper copy. You could take the wiki and update that, and then you could print a paper copy from that, and so on and so forth, and sort of go back and forth between the two. So this is a really important piece of the open source new generation that we're hoping will encourage in pattern languages. So if you go into the browser window and you just type in npl.wiki, that's all you need to type, because wiki is now a domain extension. And there you'll see the cover, and you click the button down at the bottom that says enter, and you can adjust your browser window size to fit what you would like to do. So there's the welcome page and the growing regions page. That's the page that introduces you to the 3 levels of scale of patterns. You can click on each one of those. And then an interesting feature that Ward has developed is that you can actually click on these sort of network diagrams and open up the patterns that correspond to those network locations. You see these little network models down below. You can do the same thing there. You click on that one and it opens mobility corridor. You click on that one and it opens avenue, and so on and so forth. And these are all the hyperlinks that are embedded in the pattern language, just like they were in the original book. The advantage now, of course, is that it's all on the web, and you can do the same thing actually by clicking through, which you can do on Wikipedia, of course, but you could never do in the original pattern language book. So we think this is pretty exciting. So try that when you get a chance, navigate through, and we hope you'll enjoy playing with the tool and with the different patterns. Right now, it's not editable, but our goal is that in the next few months, we're going to make it editable so that people can add to it and make their own patterns. They can make their own copies of the entire pattern language, and through that capability, they can actually make their own project pattern languages for specific projects and so on. So we launched this project and the book at the World Urban Forum in February of 2020, and it was very well received. But one of the most exciting things about it is the idea that different people in different parts of the world can actually begin to share patterns with each other, begin to build more patterns and more specific locally adapted patterns for urban resilience and local economic development, human development, many other things. We think this is an exciting capability. So now, of course, we are in the midst of a pandemic. We're all assessing the lessons of this period, and I've been involved in thinking and writing about that, as many of us have. These are a couple of blog posts I've written on the topic, and the need for not just social distancing, but sociable distancing, as I've termed it, and also the need to understand Christopher Alexander's important point about not only a city is not a tree, but a building is not a tree, and what some of the lessons are for that. And some other lessons from the pandemic that I think are not just lessons for this moment, but are lessons for the world beyond this moment. That this is a kind of teachable moment, if you will, that we need to take some lessons from, particularly when it comes to public space and urbanization and the way we're settling our cities. One of the big worries, frankly, is that we may actually retreat into the capsules of our cars and into these drive-through lifestyles that it seem to have increased. And so it's important for us to understand, I think, the nature of public space and the ways that we can adapt public space to keep us safe, which of course has always been the case in human history, that public space is not only there to connect us, but to protect us as well. That's an important aspect of it. So I've been thinking about a couple of new patterns for COVID-19 related patterns that I'd like to take you through, and then we can perhaps discuss that. So the first thing you'll notice is, again, the classic pattern language format. And I think that's very important, as I said before, to use a format that has proven to be successful and user-friendly, a tradition, if you will, and exactly as the book has invited us to do. So I'll run you quickly through the four patterns, and then I'll take a little more time on each one. Here is sociable distancing. Again, the idea that there are ways to be connected as well as safe in public spaces. Buildings that are not trees. Again, there are ways that people can be connected to one another without being crowded into dangerous spaces within buildings. It has to do with the typology of the building. Ways to have dining experiences and gathering experiences on the street where people can stay safe in parklets. You're familiar with the idea of a parklet, I'm sure. And then finally, how patients can be visited safely by loved ones in this incredibly important time of life, and ways that people can have a humane experience in hospitals, not what is currently an inhumane experience in many ways. So going back to sociable distancing, the problem statement here is that some people believe social distancing means that people cannot interact safely in public space, and this is not true. And the discussion goes through some of the importance of being connected in public space, including the work of Eric Kleinenberg Again, the research citations are very important. The evidence-based approach, I think, is very important. And then the ways that people connect to one another within public space, the sort of room-like spaces, not only in private spaces where they're literally rooms with doors and windows and so on, but also in public spaces, there are these room-like spaces that are very important for us to understand and to be able to use safely. And again, you see the downward hyperlinks to some of the other patterns in this short collection. Going forward, buildings that are not trees, it is not density per se, but the pattern of density that makes us unsafe. And this shows the diagram from the Urban Task Force of 1999 that shows actually exactly the same density in these three examples, but very different patterns of connectivity when people interact, for example, with the perimeter block system that are much safer than, for example, the tower block or the high-rise format where people are in a tree-like structure and are forced to have this sort of dendritic pattern of connectivity. The discussion talks about Chris Alexander's paper, A City is Not a Tree, and then concludes design buildings as web networks with multiple interconnecting pathways that give people the ability to maintain safe distances when needed. Then talking about the safe dining parklet, and you're all, I think, probably familiar with parklets, the idea that underutilized parking spaces can be reclaimed as public spaces. So here's an example in Hood River, Oregon, that creates these little booths that are safely isolated. There are special needs that must be taken into account to keep people safe as well as comfortable in that kind of environment. And the pattern walks through some of those issues and gives some examples of how you can, for example, keep people comfortable with various kinds of tenting or portable heaters, and in the case of hot weather, misting and so forth. So the conclusion is that when you can benefit from that, create a permit process to do it, establish the rules and the parameters and the means to maintain comfort, and then again, downward hyperlinks to complete that. Finally, the safe visitation hospital. People need to be protected from diseases when they visit or are visited by loved ones, but at the same time, it's inhumane to deprive people of the ability to be with their loved ones during these critical phases of life and death. And we've all heard the horrific stories of COVID-19 patients who have been isolated from their loved ones. But this is an ongoing challenge, not just with COVID-19. It's understandable that hospitals need to maintain sanitary conditions and protect people, but we need to find a way to accommodate visitation. So here's one solution. The patient rooms are bookended with a visitor room that opens up on the other side and allows a pane of glass between them, maybe even gloves and so on, that allows contact. And these are part of two different circulation realms. The family and visitor realm includes gardens and a pavilion and other support structures. And then the patient and staff hallway is isolated from that and goes back to the back of building facilities and the medical facilities and so on. So that family and visitors enter from the street, and the patients and staff have a separate circulation realm that goes to the back. And there are very nice support structures here. There's gardens and family pavilions that visitors can spend time in. Patients can look out on and see their family and friends approaching and so on. They could stay here for extended periods of time if they wanted to. Therefore, build safe visitation hospitals and other care facilities, nursing homes, hospice care, and create two circulation realms, one for patients and staff, one for visitors. Provide gardens and pavilions on the visitors' side that are visible by the patients. A much more humane pattern, I think. So, as I think you can tell, we are very excited by these new developments and by taking forward the power of pattern languages and the power of the original format of pattern languages, which is clearly capable of dealing with many new frontier challenges, including things like the COVID-19 pandemic. So, I look forward to our discussions.